Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Has Bishop Barron unlocked the treasure trove, the hidden vault of biblical interpretation and understanding the totality of what he calls the master motif of the Bible? So in this video, Bishop Barron is dialoguing with Johnathan Pageau, if I'm saying his name correctly, and Bishop Barron gets kind of fiery. He gets kind of, dare I say, Protestant preachery. He starts to really adamantly and passionately explain what he believes is the entire motif, the entire message. It's as if he has unlocked the treasure chest of what it means to perceive the totality of what the scriptures are saying. This is a very fascinating video, so stick around to the end. With that said, let's watch what he has to say, and then I will have a few comments afterwards.
Well, and that's why I learned this from the church fathers, both East and West. If there is a master theme of the entire Bible, and it's always dangerous to say, but if there's a great master theme of the entire Bible, I would say it's orthodoxy, by which I simply mean right worship, right praise. So we're made to lead all of creation in a chorus of praise to the true God. That's how the fathers tended to read the Genesis account. I interpret it in a sort of Catholic way as this stately liturgical procession of all the things coming forth from God, one after the other in a beautiful, ordered, harmonic procession, at the end of which comes the leader of the praise. That's the person, the bishop or priest that comes at the end of the procession, is now to lead the praise. So now we know what human beings are for. They're for right praise, and not just for themselves, but on behalf of all creation. And there, as you say, Eden itself is a temple, an elevated place, because the rivers run out from it, so it's an elevated place. And human beings are meant there to be priests, kings as well, and all that, but priests leading creation in a chorus of praise. So what goes wrong? Bad praise. It's always the problem in the Bible. I don't know an exception, really.
Yeah, you're right.
Whether you're looking in Exodus or the first book of Kings or anywhere you're looking, the problem is bad praise. And from bad praise follows everything else bad, the disintegration of the self. And that's what, I think Peterson and company are really good, the psychologists. They can talk about that. What it's like when I disintegrate on the inside, and that comes from bad praise. I start praising money or fame or power or whatever. I'm like the priest of Baal. I'm hopping around the wrong altar, and I'm slashing. They're bleeding. Well, that's people today. I think that's people in addictive patterns today, hopping around the altars of Baal, and they're harming themselves. So Elijah does what the biblical figures always do, which is he calls it back to right praise, and that's the only way that the fire is going to fall, if we're properly aligned to God. So I think that's the whole story of the Bible in many ways. Then Jesus, how do we read him? But the new Adam, he's the new David, he's the new temple, he's the one, divinity and humanity come together in him. He's the point of right praise. He's humanity giving right praise to God. So if anything, I put my finger on that as the master motif of the Bible. And see here, it's what we need to tell the world. I'll speak as a Catholic. We lost confidence in ourselves. Our game became so much, let's make ourselves pleasing to the culture. When I was a young guy, it's reaching out to the culture, making sure the culture understands, and let's use the culture's language. We lost confidence in ourselves. And honestly, the culture wasn't that interested in us. You know what I'm saying? They weren't reaching back to us with enormous, they were like, oh yeah, great, as we move on. Where the church ought to say, no, in season and out, no matter where the stupid culture is, we proclaim Christ and we proclaim right praise, which brings us back into right order and so on. And in the meantime, this culture that we're all trying to mollify, it's the priests of Baal. And there are 450 of them, right? I mean, they always outnumber us. There's one Elijah, but by God, he was the right prophet. But there are 450 priests of Baal. They're all over the place in the culture. Why are we pandering to that culture as our primary move? We should be declaring the way Elijah did.
As always, there's many things that we could touch on with what Bishop Barron is saying. One of the things that I really want to focus in on is this master motif that he's talking about, which is worship. When we understand the Bible correctly, what we're seeing is ultimately how it leads us to right worship. Now, as I've studied many Catholics, what I'm coming to see is that many of them see the scriptures in this way. Not only has there been a resurgence in wanting to understand what the Bible is saying within, American Catholicism, there's also been a general push, an apologetic push, I might add, to help people see proper worship. Now, as I'm studying the Catholic Church, one of the things that I'm seeing is how important a historical understanding of worship is. For example, in the Eucharist Congress that's happening right now. Sorry if this video doesn't age well, but the Eucharist Congress, not only with a push of Vatican II and I'm going to have another video on this, of basically taking and stripping away many of the things that might seem odd to a lot of Americans, a lot of people outside the Catholic Church, let's say. People are going to notice and see how modernized, I guess, the Catholic Church is. And I think that actually has very, very profound impacts. But with that, maintaining the message that proper worship rendered unto God in the form of the Eucharist is still very, very present within the Catholic Church. And it's almost as if it's the primary thing, which I think is only going to bode well for the Catholic Church. In terms of this biblical motif of worship, for one, to my evangelical, non-denominational evangelical Protestant friends, we need to see that it really does matter how we worship. The Eucharist matters in our worship. On the Catholic side, what I would want to show is notice how impactful the Bible has been to Bishop Barron, and not only impactful, seeing the Bible as a unified whole that renders worship back to God. He sees that as something that really, really needs to be revitalized. There needs to be a revival of that within the Catholic Church. Also, to my Catholic brethren, this has always been a big motif within the Protestant Reformation. For example, John Calvin said that the human heart is a factory of fabricating idols. So the human heart is an idol factory, is basically what he said. And there's always been, especially in the Presbyterian tradition of Protestantism, this strong master motif, to use Bishop Barron's language, this master motif of understanding that what's really going on in the world is a cosmic battle between proper worship and idol worship. And so they talk about, the human heart as the biggest issue is irreverent and improper worship to things other than God, which of course we see in the Old Testament. There's just a few things that I want to focus in on here. I have a theological dictionary here, and I just went and looked up the term worship. Now this is an evangelical dictionary, but it's also very, very unbiased, and it's been very helpful for me. But it talks about worship. Here's just a few things that it says. So the term worship in our English language comes from the word worthship. So it's the distinction between worship and worthship. When understood in that proper context, we understand that worship is ultimately giving proper worthiness, proper reverence back to something. So it says our English word means worthship, denoting the worthiness of an individual to receive special honor in accordance with that worth. The principal biblical terms, if I'm not, I think, dyslexic there, the principal biblical terms, the Hebrew saha and the Greek proskuneo, emphasize the act of prostration, the doing of obeisance. This may be done out of regard for the dignity of personality and influenced somewhat by custom, as we see in Genesis 8:2, or may be based on family relationship, as we see in Genesis 49:8, or on a station in life in 1 Kings 1:31. So basically, it's the idea here that I want to convey, is that worship is ultimately giving a proper worthiness, or it's rendering prostration in kind of a religious form or symbol, the Greek term proskuneo. It's giving somebody their due. And so when we're talking about worship to God, we're giving him his reverence, his worthiness, his due. Another interesting thing here that it mentions is the distinction between a broader sense of worship and a narrower sense of worship. So the broader sense of worship, I think, would fit more in a Catholic way of understanding worship. So it says, the broader form of worship in general is seen in honoring and praying and praising and bringing forth sacrificial gifts. So this is seen, for example, in 1 Samuel 1:3. Also in religious ritualistic worship, as seen in the house of God, for example, in Psalm 138:2. And also a desire to be walking in holiness, as we see in Psalm 29:2. So it's much more about I guess we could say, the external aspects of church worship and how that is to manifest holiness of character within us, so a sacramental view. And then in the narrower sense, I think it speaks a lot into how Protestants view worship. And it says, in the narrower sense, worship is pure adoration, the lifting up of the redeemed spirit toward God in contemplation of his holy perfection. So yeah, I think that is a perfect definition of how Protestants view worship. It's much more about your personal spirit. It's much more ambiguous, but it's not ambiguous in the sense that it's not personalized and actualized and externalized. It's all about the redeemed, the regenerate, the new birth, that person's spirit, and kind of a contemplation. It's very intellectual. The Protestant Reformation was very scholastic and intellectual, and produced this type of Christian, contemplating who? Contemplating God. So it's much less about us and much more about God. And of course, that is a very proper way of worship. It's the narrow way of worship that is talked about here. So I guess what I would want to say with that is both are needed. And I think that within the broader push of Christendom in the last, 50, well, I'll say actually 20 years, at least in my mind, how I see it, there's kind of a forming of these two. And we're starting to see, for example, a revitalization of Catholics turning to the Bible, a revitalization of their faith as something primary in their life and worship as something primary in their life. And I also see Protestants coming to a fuller understanding of sacramental theology, coming to a fuller understanding of the early church fathers and what it actually means to not just have an internal faith, but an external faith, and how that renders forth in certain ways of doing worship and maintaining certain traditions. So all that to say, I'm in accordance with Bishop Barron. Like, the master motif of the Bible, and not only the master motif of the Bible, but the master motif of the Christian life, is proper worship rendered unto God, and in the words of 1 John, avoiding idols. That was his last counsel to the people that he was writing to in his epistle, 1 John. Stay away from idols. I've said all of this, but in the end, my last application for you is to stay away from idols. And I believe if we stay away from idols, we're going to render proper worship back to God. All right, that's all I have for this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.